Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, How to Rapidly Turn Performance Management into a Productivity Tool for Business Recovery, sponsored by Clear Review. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. You will receive an email from hr.com within 2 business days. It will include the certification credit information. You can also go on to hr.com and go to your View My Credits page, where you can see the credits that you have received. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on Q&A in your webinar controls and type them in. I would like to introduce you to our 2 speakers today, Stuart Hearn and Jen Thanis. And now I'll pass it over to Jennifer to begin.
Great, thank you so much, Kathy. And hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Jen Thanis, and I am an account executive at Clear Review and will be your host today. Our focus today will be using performance management as a recovery tool for business. Not to particularly focus on the ongoing pandemic, but the reality is that a lot of businesses are currently affected at this time. Most are figuring out what needs to be done to be changed moving forward, especially when most are encouraged to do more with less, whether that's cost redundancies or other cost-cutting measures. In HR.com's 2020 survey, they found that COVID has changed performance management in some way in 85% of the organizations in the United States. Luckily, modern performance management practices can help fill these gaps in productivity in the workplace, especially in remote environments. Today, we have with us the CEO of Clear Review, Stuart Hearn. Stuart has had a lengthy HR career for over 20 years in both in-house and consultative roles, and has played a key part in developing our 5-step model for productivity, which he will share with you today. As Kathy mentioned, each attendee will receive the slides and recording via email, and please feel free to ask questions along the way, and they will be addressed towards the end. I will now begin the presentation with a poll question. So for this poll question, we're looking at what purpose does performance management currently serve at your organization? Is it gathering data for pay or promotion decisions? Is it tackling underperformance or improving productivity across the entire organization? And one thing I will say, it's really interesting to see how performance has shifted dramatically over the past few years. In the survey I mentioned earlier, they shared that the top areas of an organization's objectives for conducting performance reviews include improving productivity and boosting conversations between employees and managers, rather than the old way of thinking that the focus should just be on pay and reward. I'm having a lot of those similar conversations now with the shift in those priorities. Stuart, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, I've been working in performance management a long time, and it's something, that evolution is something that I've really seen. And I think what's happened with COVID is that it's accelerated that evolution towards thinking about performance management as productivity rather than a kind of data gathering exercise to inform pay or promotion decisions. So I'll be interested to see what the poll results are today, if that reflects that.
And it looks like we have the results here that the majority are saying improving productivity across the organization.
Yeah, which bodes well for our presentation today, because actually that's what we're going to be focusing on rather than the kind of classic pay stuff, although we'll refer to that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Okay, is it time to hand over to me now, Jen?
Yes, it is. Take it away, Stuart.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we're just going to turn our cameras off for this bit, just so you can focus on the slides, because there's quite a bit of information that we're going to be sharing, and then we'll turn them back on after the initial presentation. So post-COVID, life after lockdown, the new normal. These are words that we're starting to hear a lot now that organizations are through the immediate crisis of getting people working from home and dealing with layoffs or redundancies. Companies are now turning their attention to business recovery and preparing for the new norm, or what I kind of more optimistically like to think of it as is the better norm. Now, there's a lot of work to do here on numerous fronts, so it might be tempting to think that performance management should take a back seat for a while. And I'd certainly agree that completing annual performance evaluations does not seem like a high priority at the moment. But if we think about modern performance management, or what we would call continuous performance management, then I'd argue that this is more important than ever. So why is that? Well, there's three important factors at play here in the current environment. Firstly, most organizations have had to dramatically change their strategy for this year. So we need to align and mobilize people to deliver those new strategies, and fast. Secondly, cost cutting is going to be a reality for most organizations. So we need to get more for less from our people, which means improving employee productivity and performance. And thirdly, remote working is clearly here to stay. I've been looking at a number of surveys on this front over the past couple of months, and they're consistently showing that at least half of workers want to continue working from home in some capacity. And so managers need to be able to motivate and support their staff to deliver work with less face-to-face time. But it seems that many organizations are far from ready to face these challenges. A recent MindGym study found that 2/3 of workers claim their manager has made things worse or has had no impact on their performance during lockdown. 1 in 5 employees don't know what's going on day to day in their wider team, and 1/3 of the workforce have been less productive whilst working from home during lockdown. So what is it that we need from modern performance management to be able to address these challenges? Well, over the next half an hour, I'm going to introduce a 5-step performance and engagement model that delivers improved individual and organizational productivity. Now, whilst many of the concepts behind this approach are not going to be new to you, what we now know from data in our ClearView system is that where organizations embed all 5 of these practices, their employees successfully achieve 33% more of their objectives. So there's a lot to play for here. So I'll take these in order, and the first step in the model is aligning employees' deliverables to your strategy. Our key tool for doing this is objectives. But for objectives to be an enabler of productivity, we need to shift our mindset away from them being an HR-owned activity for the purposes of measuring performance and making pay and promotion decisions, to being a business-owned practice that enables strategic plans to be successfully delivered. Now, this evolution had already started way before COVID, but there's 2 factors now that are accelerating this change. Firstly, the pace of organizational change is increasing. In most organizations, 12-month-long objectives no longer cut it, and requirements will have definitely changed by the end of the year. And secondly, the rise in popularity of OKRs, or objectives and key results. John Doerr's Measure What Matter book, which introduced the concept of OKRs to a global audience, has pretty much become mandatory reading for most CEOs and board members over the past couple of years. Now, there are 3 key ingredients for objectives to be effective in the modern working environment. Firstly, they need to be clearly aligned to strategic goals, and this mustn't be an afterthought. People need to understand how they are contributing to the bigger picture. Objectives need to be agile. Now, plans are constantly changing and evolving, and long-term goals simply become irrelevant before they are completed, so we need to be able to change course quickly. And objectives need to enable greater collaboration, both within teams and across teams. And this is especially important with increased remote working. Whilst virtual team meetings and instant messaging on platforms like Microsoft Teams can maintain communication fairly well within teams, silos can easily build up. So we need objectives to facilitate cross-team collaboration to get important projects delivered fast. In fact, research from Gartner showed that the most effective way of achieving greater teamwork is identifying opportunities for collaboration at the objective setting stage and making an explicit agreement between the parties to work together to deliver the goal. So when we stand back and consider all these factors, it becomes clear that the old SMART acronym no longer reflects what we need from objectives in the post-COVID world. So we think it's time for a new thinking in this, using a new test which we call the 5 A's test, and that stands for aligned, agile, accessible, accountable, and aspirational. And I'll go through these quickly. So aligned means an objective aligns with and drives the wider team and organizational goals. Agile means that the objective is near term, so typically achievable in the next 1 to 4 months, and that it's reviewed at a cadence that keeps it relevant and meaningful. So for example, every quarter. Accessible means an objective can be clearly measured so that it's easy to know when it's been achieved. And to enable this, objectives should ideally have 2 components. Firstly, a short description of what the objective needs to achieve, plus a few specific deliverables or key results, which are the measurable outcomes that define what successful achievement looks like. Accountable means an objective is within the employee's control to deliver, and where collaboration is required to achieve it, this shared ownership is made explicitly clear and is agreed up front. And lastly, aspirational. So that means an objective is stretching, and successful delivery of it will drive high performance. The second step in the model is empowering achievement. Now, in traditional performance management, most effort tended to go into objective setting at the start of the year and then measuring outcomes at the end of the year. But reviewing achievement at the end of the period is too late to intervene when things haven't gone to plan. And I think, as we all know, they rarely do. So if we want to improve productivity, we need to focus efforts on the bit in between, the actual delivery of the goals. The best way of doing this is through regular structured coaching conversations or check-ins between managers and employees. A 2018 study by McKinsey found that these conversations have the single biggest impact on effectiveness of performance management, closely followed by aligning performance goals to business priorities, which was our step number 1. And those organizations whose managers regularly coached their staff were twice as likely to outperform their competitors, according to that McKinsey study. But the report also found that only 30% of companies in the study had actually embedded coaching conversations. So what's holding things back? Well, last year we commissioned our own study, which was the 2019 Performance Management Report, and it shed some light on this particular issue. When asked what concerns organizations had about changing their performance management, the top 2 cited reasons were managers' desire or availability and managers' ability. Now, desire has always been an issue in performance management as long as I've been working in it, but COVID and increased remote working presents us with a burning platform for change here. I think few managers would argue that checking in with team members regularly is not important right now. So we can double down on this opportunity and make sure managers and employees are crystal clear on the why and what's in it for me of having regular check-in conversations. When it comes to managers' ability, this goes beyond training, although that is important. Coaching doesn't come naturally to most people. And that was evidenced by the recent HR.com performance management survey, which Jen mentioned. And that found that only 28% of organizations have managers who are skilled at performance conversations. So we need to provide managers with in-the-moment coaching tools and prompts that they can use during check-ins. So for example, those prompts might be things like, are any objectives at risk of not being delivered on time? What obstacles are getting in the way? How might we overcome those obstacles? What are the options? What support can I or your colleagues provide you to successfully deliver these objectives? This kind of structure in a conversation increases managers' confidence and ability. And from what our customers tell us, the meetings actually end up taking less time because they're more focused. Using technology here can make the difference between success and failure in embedding a coaching culture. We recently carried out a study of 200 organizations' COVID recovery planning, and we found that managers using dedicated performance management technology were twice as likely to have scheduled check-ins with their staff than those who either didn't use technology or who were using the performance management add-on module of their core HRIS system. Moving on to step 3, which is optimizing well-being and engagement. The COVID pandemic has elevated employee well-being to being one of the top priorities for organizations. But we shouldn't view well-being as merely a COVID-related issue. Workplace well-being and engagement is critical to achieving high performance and productivity. A meta-analysis of 90 individual research studies, which you can see on the screen here, found that work engagement, which is a scientifically validated measure of employee well-being and engagement, and I'll come back to that later, is a higher predictor of work task performance than any other factor. And it's 3 times higher than leadership. And if we think about the amount of money that we've spent traditionally and effort on improving leadership, are we spending that amount of effort on improving work engagement? Now, if we're going to proactively leverage workplace well-being and engagement, we need to solve 2 problems. Firstly, how to measure it regularly and accurately, and secondly, how to improve it. Now, there's been lots of debate and opinion about what the best way of measuring employee engagement and well-being is. And I always like to start with the science. And I mentioned a moment ago that the meta-analysis of 90 scientific studies into the impact of employee engagement on performance found that something called work engagement has by far the biggest impact on performance and productivity. So whilst measures based on things like job satisfaction or organizational commitment may be interesting to measure, they're nowhere near as impactful as work engagement when it comes to performance at work. Now, I'd like to draw attention here to something called the employee NPS, which has become an increasingly popular measure in recent years. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it asks the question, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend working at our organization to your family or friends? Now, it's become popular because customer NPS scores have been shown to be effective. So it's kind of logical to assume that an employee-facing version will be just as effective. But the problem with employee NPS is that it measures loyalty or commitment to the organization rather than how engaged the employee is with their actual job. So for example, I could love my organization and what it does, but I could be totally disengaged and bored in my work, and that wouldn't really get picked up in an employee NPS survey. So as you can see on this chart, organizational commitment, or the eNPS, is not an effective predictor of performance or productivity. So our view, therefore, is that if we want to leverage employee engagement and well-being to improve productivity, we need to focus our attention on work engagement. So what is work engagement and how can we measure it? Well, you can see here from the definition of work engagement that it encompasses both engagement and well-being at work, which is what makes it a very compelling measure for us to use. Also, it's a very practical tool to use, as you can take action to improve it fairly quickly. Now, the best previous measure of work engagement was something called the Utrecht Work Engagement Scale, or the US for short. And that's really interesting because it's based on 2 decades of scientific research. But the problem is that it has between 9 and 17 questions, so it's too long to assess regularly. And most organizations now want to have a continuous pulse of well-being and engagement levels in their organizations. So in 2019, we commissioned a scientific study led by workplace psychologist and author Ian McRae. On the back of that research, Ian developed 3 factors that accurately reflect work engagement and well-being levels, and which can be measured in just 3 questions. So the questions are these here. My work energizes me. My work gives me a sense of purpose. And at work, I'm focused and time passes quickly. Now, measurement is only part of the solution. We also need to take action to improve engagement. But a 2018 Forbes study of 3,000 HR professionals found that 58% took no meaningful action on the back of their engagement surveys. And we need to change this if we're going to drive business recovery in a sustainable way. And the key to success here is enabling employees and managers to understand their own engagement and well-being levels and empowering them to take action themselves, shifting that expectation away from it being HR's job. Once again, technology can be the enabler for this because modern engagement tech not only measures engagement and well-being, but can also provide automated suggestions for improvement based on people's answers. And you can see a couple of examples of that on the screen here. But this alone isn't enough. We also need to open up honest dialogue between employees and managers about well-being and engagement. We already talked about the importance of structured coaching conversations. Well, many of the organizations we have worked with have built on these by including well-being discussion prompts in the conversations, or by making a specific well-being conversation template available to managers, like you can see in the example here. And what we now know from our data is these techniques are working in practice. As you can see from the graph here, organizations using Clear Review saw a significant boost in the number of well-being conversations taking place during March and April of this year as many countries entered COVID lockdown. Okay, I'm going to move on to the 4th step in the model, which is recognizing employee contributions. In an economic environment where we need to get more for less from our people, employee recognition has increasingly gathered in attention, and understandably so. According to research by Deloitte, employee productivity, performance, and engagement are 14% higher in organizations that proactively foster recognition. In traditional performance management, the most frequent approach to recognition has been pay awards, bonuses, and promotions based on performance. But these are all fraught with difficulties and often do more harm to motivation than good because of how hard it is in reality to achieve fairness and consistency. And also in a downturn, pay budgets are getting restricted and opportunities for promotion can be limited. So it can be more difficult to use these as a recognition tool anyway. So we need to look for other ways to recognize employees. And psychology shows us that to improve productivity, we should be focusing our efforts on leveraging intrinsic motivation, which is behavior that is driven by the fact that you enjoy the activity itself rather than for external rewards. Dan Pink's 2010 best-selling book Drive sets out a useful approach to intrinsic motivation, which is based on 3 elements, which are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now, these 3 aspects of an individual's work might at first seem quite hard to control and influence, which is why organizations have historically favored financial rewards because they seem easier to control. But from a performance management perspective, there are actually clear actions that we can take that will improve employees' motivation in all 3 of these factors. So let's look at some examples of that. Firstly, autonomy, which is the desire to direct our own lives. From a performance management perspective, we can involve employees in goal setting, and we can make it a collaborative process between managers and employees. We can allow employees autonomy in how they achieve their goals and deliverables and who they collaborate with to achieve them. And we can train managers to coach rather than direct their team members. Moving on to mastery, which is the urge to get better at something that matters to us. From a performance management perspective, we can prioritize the giving of frequent real-time feedback to recognize employees for work done well and for making progress. We can encourage longer-term goals to be broken down into shorter-term deliverables or milestones to maintain that sense of making progress. And we can encourage employees to have 1 or 2 personal development goals that they are working towards at any time. And finally, purpose, which Dan Pink defines as the yearning to do something, to do what we do in service of something larger than ourselves. And from performance management perspective, we can ensure that employees all understand the goals of the organization or they're part of the organization, and that they're aligning their individual or their team objectives to those goals. And we should also ensure that the organization's goals are not all about profit and financial metrics. We should include some purpose-related goals as well that employees can buy into and contribute towards. Another piece of psychological research that's relevant here to recognition is something called the job characteristics model. I'm not going to talk about it in much detail, but essentially it sets out a number of factors for making jobs more enriching and motivating, and it's things like skill variety. Now, why this research is interesting for recognition is that it found that feedback, along with autonomy, has a multiplying effect on motivational factors. So if we want to boost employee recognition through intrinsic motivation, we should be doubling down on embedding a culture of continuous feedback. Now, there's a caveat to this. The research showed that to get the motivational benefit, the feedback needs to be meaningful, clear, and specific. And it should also provide the recipient with knowledge of the results of their contribution and how it positively affected people. So just sending a recognition or kudos badge or awarding points won't achieve this. We need to build processes that unlock qualitative feedback that genuinely means something to people. A final point on recognition through feedback is the importance of putting it in writing. A consistent theme that we've heard from employees after using Clear Review is the morale boost that they get when they receive a piece of written feedback in the system. And I liken this to having someone over for dinner and a couple of days later, you receive a thank you card from them in the post. It's so much more powerful than a verbal thank you because the person took the time to put it in writing and make it personal to you. And we often hear stories of our users pulling out their phones when they finish work and showing the feedback they received to their partner over dinner. And it's this kind of positive feedback that not only boosts motivation, but it makes the recipient want to go on and give feedback to others, generating a kind of flywheel effect that builds up momentum. As an example of this from one of our customers, the 9,000 employees at Virgin Money gave each other over 250,000 pieces of feedback over the last year. That's 27 pieces of feedback per person. Okay, so the final step in the high productivity model is what we call reflect and revise. This concept should feel familiar, as one of the core components of most performance evaluations is to look back at performance over the past period. But these kind of evaluations rarely end up improving performance, as the focus tends to be on assessment and measurement rather than reflection and learning. Whilst there is absolutely a place for measurement in performance management, we need to decouple it from developmental conversations about reflection and learning, as the two just don't mix, which is a point that's been highlighted in a number of pieces of important research on performance management. And it's easy to understand why. Some of the best learnings we have in life are from the things that didn't go right, but it's not in my interest to bring these up during a conversation that will decide my pay and prospects. And I actually tested out this theory myself with one of my own direct reports last year. We had a breakthrough coaching conversation in which he raised a number of sensitive issues relating to his confidence and having a sense of imposter syndrome, which was holding him back. After that one conversation, I saw a step change improvement in his performance. And a week later, I asked him out of interest if he'd have brought up any of those issues that we discussed in the conversation, if it had involved a performance rating. And he said, no way, none of them. He said he'd have simply talked up his achievements as best he could, and we'd have ended up achieving none of the uplift in his performance. So if we want to improve employee productivity, we need to build in dedicated processes for reflection and learning that are separate from reward and rating discussions. But reflection by itself will have limited performance impact unless we commit to taking action to do things differently on the back of the reflection. So it's about reflecting back and action planning forward. And it's what the most successful athletes and sports people do. And there are 3 techniques that we can leverage here from a performance management perspective. Firstly, continuous feedback. So encouraging in the moment feedback, both constructive and positive as events occur. We all know that organizations commonly struggle with getting constructive feedback going. And something that many of our customers have done to overcome this is make it the expectation and the norm that whenever feedback is requested, the giver always provides feedback on both what was done well and what can be done even better next time. Now, whilst it can be hard to enforce this if feedback is given verbally, technology can enable this easily, as it can specifically ask the feedback giver those 2 questions at the time of giving the feedback. Secondly, having dedicated reflection conversations. These should ideally take place 2 to 3 times a year and should focus on successes, challenges, and learnings from the feedback received during the period. And these could take the form of an extended check-in, or they could be a totally separate conversation altogether. And it's really whatever works best for you and your managers and the time that they have available. And thirdly, targeted personal development goals. So the outcome of a reflection conversation or an extended check-in should ideally be 1 to 2 specific personal development goals that are managed in the same way as normal objectives or OKRs. So they're specific, they're measurable, and there's clear accountability for completion of them by a certain point in time. And that's a very different approach from traditional performance development plans, which were typically added to the back page of a performance evaluation and often put in the drawer, gathering dust until the end of the year. Okay, so that's an explanation of all 5 steps of the high productivity model. And as I mentioned at the start, our data shows that where organizations consistently carry out these 5 activities, their employees successfully achieve 33% more of their objectives on average. And an important consideration to bear in mind here is that not all of these steps have to be done in one hit. We know that managers are exceptionally busy and will only be able to take on a certain amount of knowledge and change at any one time. So we need to think of this as a change journey that we embed over time, rather than one big bang launch of all 5 of these things. Now, whilst the way that every organization approaches embedding performance management change is different, what we most commonly see from the companies that we work with is that they launch steps 1 and 2 simultaneously and put a lot of effort into making sure that they are successfully embedded first. And that makes sense, as making sure that people's efforts are clearly aligned to the business strategy and then coaching people to successfully deliver are the core building blocks for high performance and productivity. And once you have that culture of regular, honest performance conversations going, it makes it much easier then to enable well-being, recognition, and reflection, because it's through structured conversations that we actually bring these 3 aspects to life and overcome those barriers to performance. Now, in a minute, Jen and I are going to bring this to life with a few examples of how some of the organizations we work with have put this model into practice and have embedded it into their ways of working. But first, I think, Jen, it's time for our second poll question.
Yes, it is. So for our second poll question, it's which element of performance management do you have the most challenges with? Is it setting good quality objectives, getting managers to have regular coaching conversations, or creating a culture of continuous feedback and recognition? And the one thing I will say is the conversations that I've been having recently, especially with remote working becoming the new norm surrounding COVID-19, that these conversations I'm having with HR directors about how to best get their managers and employees speaking more frequently and also in more detail, really looking for some of those coaching in terms of their objectives. What's your view on this, Stuart?
Yeah, I think you're bang on there. And since we started Clear Review back in 2016, probably the most common thing people were looking for is how can I get a coaching conversation or check-in conversation going. I've tried to embed it, but I haven't managed to do that. So can you help? So I think that is a real key concern. We also, from my conversations I have with HR directors and CEOs, there is also a focus on trying to get that honest feedback thing going. I mentioned earlier on about the importance of feedback being meaningful, and it can't just be high fives and praise. It needs to be constructive feedback that helps people to get better as well. And I know that's often a challenge for people that they look to us as a technology provider to help solve.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it appears that the majority agrees as well, with about 48% about having managers to create those regular coaching conversations and 37% about the culture of continuous feedback and recognition. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like we're all thinking somewhat similar at this point.
Bonus points for us for getting it right.
Yes. So from here, we'll actually give you some options in terms of putting the model into practice. And we have a few case studies that we'd like to share with you. And I'll once again turn on my camera and say hello.
And in terms,
okay, perfect.
There we go.
Hello again. Great.
Hello.
So in terms of putting those models into practice, we really wanted to take the time to develop 3 different case studies to share with you today. And the first one we'd like to address with you is Virgin Money. And Virgin Money is a bank that employs 10,000 people across multiple locations. Stuart was closely involved with them, so he's going to give us some insight into their performance management journey.
Thanks, Jen. So in terms of when I started working with them, I'd just like to start off with thinking about some of the performance and productivity issues that they were looking to address through performance management, because I think that's important. When we started working with them, they were only about half the size they are now, but they had really ambitious growth plans and needed to drive increased performance and productivity through their people to achieve them. But the problem is they were using a very traditional performance management approach. So annual objectives were dictated to from above, and they had a single annual performance evaluation that had ratings. And these were negatively impacting performance and productivity rather than driving it. And I've got a quote here that I've written down from their head of organizational development, Francis Lake. And he said that there was a focus on process over purpose, leading to futile performance scorecards, ratings, and appraisals being forced upon both employees and managers, creating resentment and demotivation. Now, I don't think that's unique to them. I've worked in-house in HR before working in performance management, and I worked in a few organizations where that was absolutely the case.
Mm-hmm. And what did they see as a solution to this problem?
Well, Francis was really clear that tinkering with the edges of performance management was not going to change anything. And that's something that I've seen a lot of organizations get wrong, is this kind of continuous little change here and there about performance management. Employees just going to kind of get fatigued and things just look like emperor's new clothes. So Francis was very conscious of that and recognized that a whole scale transformation was needed if they were genuinely going to change their culture to one of high performance. Now, Francis had ambitious plans and he wanted to embed all 5 of those steps of the model that I've talked about today, but sensibly recognized that it wouldn't be possible from day one. So they focused their attention initially on setting quarterly team goals. So they're a bit different to a lot of organizations. They didn't have individual performance goals. They actually have just team goals. So everyone in the team has the same goal that they're working towards to get that collaboration going. And they also wanted to focus on getting regular check-in conversations and real-time feedback going.
Mm-hmm. So how did they go about implementing it, Stuart?
Well, like most of our customers, using software was key for them as they wanted to be able to have visibility of data and analyze it closely to understand adoption rates and see which areas of the business were getting momentum and where they needed to put in further change management work. But what made their implementation approach a little different for me was that they provided experiential training to in the new performance management approach to all their managers. So what do I mean by this? Well, they did this by giving managers hands-on practice of using performance management techniques in a safe training environment, but to solve real business problems. So each group was given a business problem that they had to solve in 2 hours, which equated to 6 months of actually running a business. And they had to set agile team objectives to be able to solve that problem. And then they had to work as a team to actually achieve those objectives, whilst having periodic check-ins and giving feedback to each other along the way. So it's kind of as real life as you could possibly make it. And that helped to frame performance management as a business tool rather than an HR tool. And Francis often said that at the end of those sessions, a kind of light bulb would go off in managers' brains and they'd say, oh, now I get why performance management is important. It's not performance management, is it? It's just management. And that's been really key for them, that performance management of Virgin Money is viewed as just management. It's part of every day of what you do as a manager.
And that's really interesting, Stuart, and a very different approach to the standard training experience.
For sure.
How has their approach evolved over time?
So over time, they've actually built on that initial success of team goals, check-ins, and feedback, and they've added in individual development goals. So everybody has 2 individual development goals every quarter. And they've also embedded well-being into their process by including well-being coaching prompts into their check-in conversations. And they've also, controversially for a bank, got rid of traditional performance-related pay. So that's pretty bold for a bank to do that. And they now base pay and bonuses on group and team performance. And they only make individual adjustments to pay for exceptional performers or where there's an underperformer.
And what have the outcomes been?
Well, I've shared on the screen here some of the performance management data from them from the last 12 months. And as you can see, they've moved from 1 annual performance conversation a year to an average of 5 check-ins per year. And their employees, as I mentioned earlier on, have received over 250,000 pieces of feedback. So 27 pieces of feedback per person on average. It's fantastic. And that's some of the highest adoption of continuous performance management that I've ever seen. And I think the fact that it's just framed as everyday management rather than performance management has been a key part of this success. Although Francis does kindly say that our software has played a big part in embedding that success. What I think is really exciting about those outcomes, though, is how they've contributed to the overall success of the business. So since we've been working with them, they've doubled in size through both organic growth and acquisition. And at the end of the day, it's those kind of outcomes that businesses are really looking for.
No, I think that's really great.
So second case though, we'll move on to. Now, Jen, this is something that you've been personally involved with from Larry, who's their Chief Admin Officer, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So the Southwest Autism Research and Resource Center located in Phoenix, Arizona, Larry shared with us that he knew something was broken in their annual appraisal process and it was holding back their performance and productivity. They had their annual review process and it worked only on Excel. He often found that the process was forgotten about. There was a scramble at the end where they found that the majority of their goals were now either outdated or completely irrelevant. Initially, he thought that he needed to automate the process, but found that they also needed to change their approach to something that allowed greater agility and actually improved performance.
Yeah, that's a common scenario we come across for sure, particularly in some of the smaller organizations that are using Excel to manage this. So when they started looking at that problem in more depth, what did they find?
Larry found that there was a challenge of employees pulling together several fragmented spreadsheet-based systems, with organizational and personal development goals being spoken about on an annual basis, task-based check-ins happening monthly or quarterly, and feedback happening sporadically. There was a need to clarify what the process was and eliminate the extra burden of administration that was not providing any visibility or metrics to the senior leadership team. When information is all over the place on spreadsheets, it makes it very difficult to align people's performance with company strategies.
For sure, absolutely. What was interesting about this is what you said that about what the rest of the management team and employees thought about what needed to be done.
Yes, they were. Larry was not alone at all in terms of the way he was feeling when he presented the idea of a new continuous type of process, along with using a cloud-based application to boost productivity surrounding objectives. His employees all agreed. Larry actually shared the idea with an all-hands meeting throughout the entire organization, where he presented a picture of an Excel file on fire, which was met by applause by the entire organization that the CEO still talks about to this day. So it was clear from there that everyone agreed that the nature of the roles at the organization required a regular and agile approach to engage their employees and improve the performance.
And I think that's really interesting because we often have this feeling that managers are not going to buy into this kind of change, but in many cases they do, and they want it just as much as the HR people involved. So what areas of performance management did they focus on first, and what have been some of the outcomes that they've had?
Giving and receiving feedback became really important in their culture as they saw the overall change in performance management as a collaborative effort with communication from the top down rather than just a project from the HR team. Having the ability to align goals to strategic overarching organizational goals was widely praised as there was now better visibility into different areas of the business. Overall, what they've seen at SARRC has found that the support and adoption of the project has been hugely positive. 82% of the employee base has been continuously receiving monthly feedback, and there is an astonishing 98% of engagement in quarterly check-in conversations. The leadership team has been super pleased with the simplistic and intuitive nature of the software to present their vision to the employees. And maybe the happiest of all is their HR team, who no longer have to deal with disconnected systems and manual processes. They can view relevant data easily and engage more meaningfully developing their talent.
Yeah, so less time doing admin, more stuff on coaching people to be the best that they can be.
Absolutely. And then the final case study we'll talk about today is Wesleyan, and Stuart will present that one. And in terms of looking at this particular case study today, Stuart, you were really keen to include Wesleyan as a case study in today's webinar. Why was that?
Yeah, I was. And, obviously there's so many organizations that we could talk about, but I chose Wesleyan because well, like the other organizations we've been talking about today, improving performance and productivity was a key driver for them because they had a new strategy that they had just written and they needed to deliver that. And it was clear to them they needed everyone to focus on taking accountability for delivering that across the organization. So that's common to all the ones we've talked about. But what I found interesting about Wesleyan is the way that they approached doing that, which was a little bit different to most of the organizations we tend to deal with.
So what exactly made them different?
Well, like most organizations, setting goals aligned to their new strategy was a clear focus for them. But rather than the goals being just about delivering that strategy, they were clear that they really wanted staff to also focus on having specific, measurable personal objectives around development and well-being. So really focusing on that kind of reflection bit of the model that we talked about earlier on. So each employee at Wesleyan has two sets of objectives. They have what they call contribution objectives, and those are your kind of performance-based delivering the company's strategy objectives. But they also have every employee has what they call their plan for thriving. And those are the objectives that focus on personal growth or well-being. Now, having personal development goals isn't new in itself, and that's kind of an evolution of personal development plans. But what I think is unique, or something I haven't seen very much of, is that they have specific well-being related objectives for many of their employees. And that's something I haven't seen a huge amount of organizations do before.
And I would definitely agree with that. And has that is that development and well-being element been embedded in other aspects of the performance approach?
Yeah, they have, and that's what I really like. So they've adopted a culture of regular check-in conversations, like most of our customers. But rather than making those just about discussing progress against work objectives, which I think was probably the most common element of a check-in conversation, they've actually embedded coaching questions around well-being and personal development into those conversations. So the whole performance management approach has been this very clear balance of delivering what the organization needs on one hand, but also recognizing that it's important that we talk about what the individual needs. And of course, that then in turn benefits the organization too, because the individual is being the best that they can be. And they've underlined that ethos, and I really like this, in how they branded the clear review system internally. So some of our customers rename the system and they use names, things like Our Performance, but Wesleyan call the system Thrive. And I think that's just really nice and speaks volumes to their employees.
And I agree. I love that. And from looking at their outcomes on the screen here, it looks like this has really resonated with people internally.
For sure, they have got really, really good adoption. Pretty much everyone in the organization now has strategically aligned goals. And when they look at their data, when they looked at their data recently, they found that over 300 well-being specific objectives had been set. And they looked at those and they were focusing on things like maintaining mental and physical health, giving back, and improving work-life balance. So again, really interesting to see objectives focusing on those kind of things rather than traditional kind of, I need to improve in this skill or I want to go on this kind of course. I think that's been fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always great to see someone taking a different approach and getting really proactive in things. I love the name Thrive. So
yes, great.
Awesome. Well, from here, actually, we'll take everyone into our final poll question of the day. What technology do you use to support performance management? Is it no technology at all? Free tools like Word, Excel, or Trello? Specific performance management software? Or a performance module of your core HRIS system? And I will say we definitely see quite a spread around these different types of technologies for performance management. Recently, I'd say I've been having more conversations with people that are looking at the HRIS systems as they're coming out with more modules, but a lot of organizations have found that they essentially track data, not facilitate those kind of continuous performance conversations and don't always have those capabilities. So Stuart, any thoughts on that? Are you seeing the same?
Yeah, I think since over the last few years, since I started Clear Review, I'd say the majority of the organizations that came to us, some of them had nothing in place or were using things like Word, but I'd say the majority of them had either tried using the performance module of their HRIS system, and as you say, had found that all it really ends up being is a data capture exercise, and they don't get that cultural change of having really good coaching conversations. They're not really getting traction on feedback, and the goals don't tend to be fully aligned to what the strategy is. So I think I've seen a lot of people having tried those, and then equally other people having not tried them but seen them and realized them that isn't going to be the case and it's not what they're looking for. So I would expect that to be the highest one, combined with people who are still using things like Word doc or paper. And
Stuart, actually looks like you're right on point here, where the majority we are seeing about 39% using a core HRIS system and 34% with tools such as Word and Excel. So very much a spread across the board.
Yeah, and I think it might be interesting to just quickly draw back to that conclusion we found from that study of 200 organizations that we looked at for their COVID planning, and that found that people who were using the dedicated software were twice as likely to have that culture of conversations embedded than if they were using the performance module of the HRIS system. So, that data really does back up the conversations that you and I have both been having with HR directors.
Absolutely. The next thing we'll show you is our Clear Review Performance Academy. And Stuart, what you've spoken about in the product productivity model today has been great. And we do realize that overall, this could be quite a lot of content to take in 1 hour. You could probably do a webinar and probably each one of the individual steps for an hour apiece. And we've only scratched the surface here, and we understand that there's an opportunity to learn much more. So I invite all of you to join our completely free Performance Academy, where you can learn about the subjects we've discussed today in more detail. You could take courses and network with other like-minded individuals and other senior leaders about performance management. From here, I'll actually open it up to some of the questions we've received. Stuart, the one I see here in step 4, you talked about recognition and the power of intrinsic rewards over extrinsic rewards like pay and bonuses. But what if an organization needs to do performance-related pay because they can't afford to give everyone a pay raise or bonus? What is the best way to go about this?
It's a great question. It's something that I've seen, we've been asked quite a lot recently, is maybe people, there's two things we're seeing. Either people used to do performance related pay and want to stop, or they want to start it because they can't afford to give everyone a pay rise, so they have to decide who gets it. It's a minefield, and as I said when I talked about the recognition in step 4, it's very easy to cause more damage than good, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. So there's 3 things that I've seen that are really important to get right. Firstly, you need to decouple pay from those performance and developmental conversations for the reasons I explained earlier. I can't focus and be really open and honest and have psychological safety about how I need to improve and develop if I know it's going to affect my pay. So you've got to separate the two. So you can do both, but don't do them at the same time. Secondly, be fully transparent about how pay decisions are made. Some of the criticism of organizations that have taken away ratings is that people then don't understand how performance-related pay decisions are being made. So you need to be really clear. If you're not going to use ratings, say that these are the questions that we're going to ask, these are the things that we're going to take into account and why. So be fully transparent. And then thirdly, it's about minimizing recency bias. So helping managers make decisions around pay, not just thinking about the last 4 weeks, but thinking about the whole last 12 months in total. And that's where technology can really help, because it can compile all of that performance data from the year that in real time as people are making those kind of paid decisions. And you can also use data analytics to highlight inconsistencies between different areas of the business, because consistency is also important. People will think it's unfair if they feel they've been treated differently to someone who sits in another department who's their friend, for example.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. And then the next question I have for you, Stuart, is how can we get manager buy-in to the 5 steps? And what if they are not wanting to assume that part of the accountabilities?
Yeah, so as I've mentioned before, I think to a certain extent we are pushing on an open door right now. I think we've never had a better time and opportunity to help managers to understand why these kind of approaches are really important with the whole kind of increase in remote working. But that's not to say that we don't need to focus on really good change management as well. So the organizations that get the best adoption of this are the ones that focus really heavily in their communications on the why and what's in it for me to the people. If you just focus on, hey, here's the new approach and this is how often you have to do it, and here's your template for giving feedback, off you go, that it doesn't happen. You need to get people bought into why they should be doing it. And then the how becomes much easier. The other thing I would say is that managers are busy people. So even if they are bought into it, you've got to make it as easy as possible for them. So if performance management was once a year, you could just about get away with a clunky process. But if you're doing it more regularly, it better be really easy for them and seamless. So great technology that's integrated with your other tools, things that can nudge and remind people to take action when they need to, are really important for getting managers to take action, and employees too.
And I think that's a great way to get managers thinking as well. So we do have a few more questions here, but we are approaching time. So what I would like to share is that all the questions that were submitted today will be presented to us, and we will be happy to reach out to you directly or share some on our social media page following the meeting today. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining. Thank you for Stuart to sharing the presentation, to all of the attendees for being here. As we mentioned, everything will be emailed over to you, including the recording and the slides. And we hope to see all of you in the Performance Management Academy. Before we go, though, I would like to pass it back over to Kathy and back to HR.com.
Thank you, Jennifer. This concludes our webcast today. I would like to thank our presenters as well as all of you for joining us. If you would like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available on hr.com very shortly. And the webcast credits will appear in your hr.com account within 2 business days. We also send out an email with the credit information. Your feedback is very important to us. Please take a moment and fill out the exit survey that will appear on your screen. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.